Richard Feynman said, "Never confuse education with intelligence. You can have a PhD and still be an idiot." What are some real-life examples of this? My wife's stepfather was a chemist who currently has diabetes. One night he went to the ER because his blood sugar was dangerously high. He claimed he was eating well. He normally doesn't, so there's no reason why his blood sugar was high. In his car was a 2-liter bottle of ginger ale mixed in with grape juice. He said that the two canceled. Their sugar's out and we didn't know what we were talking about because he was a chemist and he no-show to combine things. I have a PhD and I am an idiot in most respects. All it takes to get a PhD is to be really good at or persistent in doing research in one narrow area of study. Edit. So several commenters pointed out that I simplified things too much. A PhD also requires hard work, luck, and some basic competence in a topic. But that doesn't preclude one from being completely clueless in other aspects of life. Peter Duesberg, molecular biologist who works as a researcher at UC Berkeley and has an otherwise stellar career and well known for his work. Beckemian AIDS denialist, claiming there's no link between HIV and AIDS. Led countless people down the rabbit hole, including many who were HIV positive. The C individuals ended up infecting others and refusing antiretroviral therapies. This included an AIDS denialist activist named Christine Majore who infected her infant through breastfeeding thinking, "Hey, it's not a big deal, it's just HIV, it doesn't cause AIDS." I worked with a girl that graduated from Brown. She would never shut up about it. Always Brown this and Brown that. I went to a state school and it was apparent that she looked down on anyone that didn't attend an Ivy League school. So one day she was doing that and I couldn't stop myself. I said something like, "Oh, you went to Brown?" And yet, here we are, together in the same place, doing the same job. I had a professor for higher mathematics who had real difficulties figuring out how to extract a cup of coffee from the vending machine. Bless him. Not quite PhD. But I was at a party, in the UK, full of med students and stereotypically everyone was off their face drunk. Well, some guy fell over and broke his collarbone and immediately got trushed by a dozen of them all fussing and asking him the same questions over and going through the checklist. Half an hour later and he's still on the couch in pain and I go in to ask if anybody knows why the ambulance is taking so long. Nobody had an answer because nobody had called one. A party full of medical students hadn't called an ambulance or made any transport arrangements for a guy in severe pain with a broken clavicle. Idiots. I have a PhD, and I work with a bunch of PhDs. Basically, a lot of them think that because they succeeded in one area, they are an expert in every other area of life. And they always have strong opinions about everything. I think it's also called a PhD syndrome. Dr. Ben Carson, one of the most skilled neurosurgeons alive, thinking that the Egyptian pyramids were used to store grain. As someone who works security in a hospital, I can say a good 90% of the doctors there are smart but lack any type of common sense, and sometimes I wonder how they function on a day-to-day basis. EDIT. I also forgot to mention I'm almost 2 years in a relationship with a pediatric cardiologist and it's as shocking at home as it is with the ones I work with. LMAO, but I can't say it's boring. I know many people in the science field that conduct double-blind randomized controlled experiments in the lab and then go home and check their horoscopes. I work with medical doctors all the time for work. Doctors are some of the dumbest smart people I have ever met. I worked IT for a hospital. I was speaking to a doctor who forgot his password. While he was spelling his name phonetically over the phone, he said, Z as in xylophone. Needless to say, my eyebrows raised. A physics professor got catfished by someone claiming to be a supermodel who asked him to bring her suitcase from Brussels to Milan. Of course, the suitcase had drugs. An idiot would have seen through that in 2 seconds, but a super smart guy convinced himself it was real. Model imposter lands in jail for drug smuggling. I was at a keg party at college and the gravity keg was set up. Someone complained that the beer was not flowing, so I checked that the keg was still almost full. Turns out someone closed the air intake on top. I opened the intake and poured myself a beer. Problem solved. A few minutes later someone else complains the beer is out. I told them. The keg was full a few minutes ago and it was a top problem that I fixed. They told me they just came from the keg. I go back to the keg and find the intake was closed again. Opened it and poured the young lady who said it was empty a beer. As she is leaving, my sweetmate comes in and goes to the intake and closes it. Now my sweetmate is a straight A student who gets all is mostly due to his photographic memory. Back to the keg. So I tell him that he needs to leave the intake open to let air in to displace the beer coming out of the lower tap. He then proceeds to tell me that since the beer is carbonated, air is not needed to replace the liquid volume lost when the beer is dispensed. So I asked him 2 questions. If it is not needed, why is there the upper tap, and does he really think the amount of gas the carbonation gives off in a glass of beer is equal to the volume of the liquid beer? He thought for a few seconds and his only response was, "I have a 4.0, what is your GPA?" Then he walked away. My ex had a real lack of knowledge and common sense when it came to children. She's currently completing her PhD in biochemistry and molecular biology. She was confused though when I said I couldn't go out after putting my toddler to bed as I had no one to babysit. In her mind, once my daughter was asleep, she no longer needed anyone here to take care of her. I chalked it up to cultural differences and never being around children. Eventually, though, our opinions on raising kids differed too much and he had to end things for my daughter's sake. What is a good, the bad guy wins, movie? The Usual Suspects. No Country for Old Men. Empire Strikes Back, of course. SE7EN, 7. Megamind. Cabin in the Woods. Well, the bad guys actually lose, but the world ends as a result. Silence of the Lambs. Buffalo Bill is killed, but Lecter escapes to eat another day in the process. This blew up and I was not expecting it. Thanks. There Will Be Blood. IAM The Third Revelation. Bowling. Upgrade. Fallen. That movie was uckin' awesome, great ending. Who is the kindest, rudest celebrities you've met IRL? Pink was one of the nicest people ever. She turned UP at a show I used to work for, and invited me and THE host to sit at her table with her and hair assistant. She refused to let me pay for anything the whole night, and treated me like her best friend from school for 3 hours. She bruised my shoulder playing drums to the music, live band. Karaoke. And before I left she kissed my cheek, and gave me her email address, yes, her real one. Hair assistant replied. After we left, my buddy was giving me a bad time about being the new celeb boyfriend, and I was confused. It took him and 2 other people, the AV guy and the bouncer, to convince me that it was Pink. I had no clue, which is common enough, and she introduced herself as Alicia from Philly, and I believed her. TBH, I think she enjoyed not having to be anyone other than Alicia for a few hours, and if my obliviousness was able to provide that, then that works for me. I live fairly close to John Bernthal. I ran into him while hiking up in the mountains way out in the middle of nowhere. He was very nice and friendly, but I didn't make a deal of talking to him or taking pictures with him since he had his kids with him and I was up there to avoid people, so I'm sure he was as well. Tom Hiddleston was shooting in my city when Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1 came out. Cinema about half empty, and was sitting in the same row as me and my GF at the time, wearing cap and staying under the radar. After the movie finished we were leaving, and as we were passing him I told him I was a fan of his work etc., and he was kinda dismissive and quickly left. We were a bit bummed out but didn't take it personally. When we left the cinema, it's attached to a sporting arena and there's a lobby etc. We saw Thathe was waiting near the exit, and when he saw us he came over and explained that he didn't want a big scene. Marvel actor being spotted in screening OFA Marvel movie etc. and spent 20 minutes with us. Chatting about films and books. Very nice dude and seemed genuine in wanting to have a chat. Outside of that, I've met a number of celebrities through my previous job, and some highlights of lovely people are the late Helen McCrory, warm, funny, kind. And Gillian Anderson was fantastic too, had some fun conversations. Worst I've met, Kit Harington. He's rude and egotistical. Patrick Stewart made me feel like he really listened and cared about every word I said to him in the 2 minutes we shook hands and chatted. Proper gent. I met Weird Al at a con once. While he was signing the photo I bought, I told him about how HE inspired me to write my own parody songs. He seemed genuinely interested and asked if I had a YouTube channel, but I told him I just write them, not record them. Super nice dude, at least for the brief time we spoke. Kindest? Jack Black by far. Met Matthew Gray Gubler a year or so ago in NYC at like 1 a.m. He was talking with a group of fans on the street, and my friend noticed him and stopped to join the huddle. Genuinely the nicest person ever. He even did cartwheels with my friend. Went to a book signing with Ian McKellen signing a LOTR art book when the first movie came out. His scheduled time was over, but he stayed for like on-hour overtime to sign for everyone in line. Eddie Murphy. Total piece of hit lol. I work in a high-end resort and we had him and his family check into one of our suites. Only this time he didn't have his assistant with him. The bellman who was bringing the bags up to the room was trying to separate all the suitcases into the different rooms and in an effort to make sure everything was in the most convenient room decided to ask where he wanted one of the bags. Without even turning his head, Eddie goes, "Why the UCK is this guy talking tone?" Bellman ends up sorting everything himself in before he leaves, has the audacity to ask if there's anything else they might need. Eddie proceeds to lose his hit and goes, "What's with thigh-sucking guy and his questions?" Honestly, I was in tears laughing when he came back and told the story, but wow, what a ick. I worked at a PetSmart in Atlanta and one day, out of nowhere, Queen Latifah walked in. I swear, you'd have never thought she was a celebrity. We just chatted about dogs and whatnot and there was no pretense. She didn't even have a bodyguard or anything. Just a regular gal coming in PJ pants, getting food for her puppies. Such a great woman. I also got to meet David Hyde Pierce after a show of curtains on Broadway. This was the day after he won the Tony, and he was so gracious. Let me take a picture and everything. Love him. Ellen DeGeneres is a smug aunt. I've never met someone as rude or as self-entitled as she is. She near had the waiter in tears. I wanted to go and flip her AMN table. I thought the stories about her were a joke. She very much proved they were not. A friend of mine has worked with a lot of high-profile rappers over the years and she said that Ludacris is hands down the nicest, most down-to-earth and collaborative celebrity she's ever met. Like, kinda night and day from his public persona. She said he walked into the room with zero go and was always humble, polite, super professional, and hilarious. Kanye West, on the other hand, is apparently exactly the person you'd expect him to be. Edit. I keep seeing similar comments, so I'm pasting my first reply clarifying what I said about his public persona, with a few minor tweaks to elaborate. I should have said his rap persona, or stage persona, or something like that. I just meant how he portrays himself on a record and in videos, boisterous, loud, braggadocios, etc. He, like many rappers, are known for bringing that huge energy and ego, so my friend didn't initially know what to expect. When they finally met, she said she was a little caught off guard because he just didn't exude any of that attitude or energy at all. I mean, I totally get that most celebrities are gonna be far more regular, or normal, when they're not performing, but with musicians in particular, it can be harder to tell what's real and what's show, and I imagine the lead up to meeting them to work with them can cause a lot of, who am I actually meeting, anxiety. She described it like he showed up to their first meeting and was just chill, kinda reserved at first, but ultimately acted like any other person working on this project with her and her team. I'm paraphrasing here, but she described his overall attitude being like, my ideas aren't any more valuable than anyone else's, and a couple of times just completely scrapped his idea in favor of someone else's simply because he genuinely thought it was the better idea. If that wasn't cool enough already, he'd go out of his way to lift those people up and give them credit and make them look good. It just sounded very cool and collaborative and was never about anything other than making the overall project the best it could be. Luda. Bruce Dickinson liked my bacon so much he gave me a shirt. Keith Richard, Ron Wood. Met them late 80s or so when Woody had an art gallery in Lower Manhattan, both really cool guys. Funny and drunk AF lol. Me mother met Mick Jagger in the 89s when Jerry Hall gave birth. She said he was really quiet and unassuming. Sent all the nurses in the neonatal unit boxes of Godiva chocolate and 24 roses, each with a personalized note. Giancarlo Esposito was incredibly warm and also told me I should try and get into voice acting. I have never and will never attempt to do so, but it was such a nice compliment for no reason. Bryan Cranston, he was filming an episode of Malcolm in the Middle in a Sherman Oaks shopping mall. I happened to be there with my kids and we had just bought some See's candies. We were walking and he approached us and said, "Oh, you bought me candy?" We laughed, gave him a piece, and he autographed the candy bag. He spent a few minutes with us and was very down to earth and funny.